It happened on a night that should have been filled with nothing but joy. My son, Ethan, stood in the middle of a grand Chicago hotel ballroom, champagne glass raised high, his bride Sophia glowing beside him. The music softened. The room leaned in, and I waited with pride for the words that every mother longs to hear. But instead, I got this. My father-in-law paid for everything. My mum, not even a flower. The words hit me harder than a fall from a rooftop. 150 guests turned toward me, their faces shifting between pity and discomfort. Marcus. My ex-husband dropped his eyes to the floor. Even Victor Delgado, Sophia's father, the man Ethan was praising, looked stunned. In that moment, 35 years of sacrifice, of sweat, of nights spent working instead of sleeping, were wiped away with a single cruel sentence. I sat frozen, my smile trembling, my heart breaking behind it. And as the applause rang out like slaps in the face, one question screamed inside me. Why would my son do this to me? And what was I supposed to do next? To understand what those words at the wedding truly meant. You need to go back with me. My name is Linda Vargas. I'm 67 years old, and for 35 years I carried the weight of Vargas Construction on my shoulders. It began in 1987 with a dream bigger than my bank account. I walked into a branch office 3 times and was rejected each time. The 4th time, the manager looked me straight in the eye and said he saw something in me, but it would cost me everything. To get that $20,000 loan, I mortgaged my modest house and convinced my parents to risk their home as co-signers. That was the only way forward. Those early years were brutal. I woke up before dawn, worked until nearly midnight, and repeated that routine 7 days a week. I missed dinners, birthdays, and most weekends. I came home with blistered hands, aching muscles, and the smell of cement and sweat clinging to me. But I never questioned why I was doing it. Every nail hammered, every contract signed, every building completed, I was doing it for Ethan. I wanted him to inherit not just a company, but a future that could never be taken away. By 1994, the company landed its first big contract, a 40-unit residential complex outside Chicago. I remember taking Ethan, just 9 years old, to the job site. He wore a yellow hard hat that kept slipping down his forehead and asked me a million questions. Could he lead workers one day? Could he design buildings like the ones in my plans? I told him yes, because I believed this was the legacy I was building for him. Over the next decade and a half, Vargas Construction grew stronger. We expanded into Wisconsin and Indiana, building coastal developments and residential projects. By 2010, the company employed 63 people and was valued at more than $2 million. For someone who once begged a bank for a $20,000 loan, that number felt like proof that the impossible could be done. But behind every achievement was sacrifice. I worked through holidays. I signed papers at hospital waiting rooms. I lost weekends most parents spent watching their kids' games or hosting family barbecues. That was my trade-off. And I made peace with it, telling myself Ethan would one day understand, that he would see the sweat behind the foundation. Looking back now, I realize how much of myself was poured into every brick, every blueprint. I wasn't just building a company, I was building Ethan's future. And that's why his words at the wedding didn't just sting, they shattered me, because they erased the very life I had lived for him. Things began to shift the moment Ethan introduced me to Sophia Ortega. She was warm, bright, and ambitious, the kind of woman any mother would be glad to welcome. But what unsettled me wasn't Sophia herself. It was her family, especially her father, Victor Delgado. Victor owned a successful chain of boutique hotels along the coast. He carried himself with the polish of a man born into wealth. His suits looked tailored in Milan. His gestures were always calm and calculated, and his conversations carried that effortless tone of people who never had to worry about the price of a gallon of milk. When the wedding plans began, Victor insisted on covering the entire celebration. "It's a tradition in our family," he explained with a charming smile. On the surface, it seemed generous. I told myself it was simply custom, nothing more. I agreed, thinking there would be other moments when I could show Ethan and Sophia the depth of my love in ways money couldn't measure. But as the months passed, I noticed something I hadn't expected. Ethan, who once spent hours talking with me about construction projects and the future of Vargas construction, began pulling away. Our dinners grew shorter, our calls more infrequent. When we did speak, I sensed a new hesitation, as if my stories of working 12-hour days and negotiating land deals embarrassed him compared to Victor's glossy tales of hotel expansions and international clients. It wasn't just distance, it was shame. My son, the boy who used to wear a yellow hard hat and follow me proudly through building sites, suddenly seemed uneasy about his roots. He no longer looked at my rough hands as a sign of strength. Instead, he seemed to see them as a reminder of where he came from, something he wanted to bury beneath the polished glow of the Delgado name. That was the moment I realized something dangerous was happening. The light of an outsider's glory had begun to overshadow the very foundation of sacrifice within our own family. It was no longer about what I had built for him. It was about the appearance of belonging to a family that seemed perfect from the outside. And quietly in those months leading up to the wedding, the distance grew into a canyon. I told myself it was just wedding stress, but deep down I knew. Ethan was being pulled toward a new orbit, one where his father-in-law's wealth shone brighter than his mother's work-worn legacy. The reception was everything you'd expect from a high society wedding. Crystal chandeliers glowed over tables set with white roses, a jazz trio played softly in the corner, and glasses of champagne shimmered under the lights. I sat there in my best suit, the one I had saved for the most special days, watching Ethan stand tall beside Sophia. He looked so much like the little boy I once carried to construction sites, except now he was a man married stepping into his own life. When he raised his glass to speak, the room fell quiet. You could feel everyone leaning in, waiting for that heartfelt moment. And I leaned in too. I was ready to hear what every mother dreams of hearing on her child's wedding day: gratitude, love recognition. Instead, I heard this: "I especially want to thank the man who made this day possible. My father-in-law, Victor Delgado. His generosity, his wisdom, his unconditional support have shown me what it means to be a true father figure. And while others haven't even given a single flower, Victor has opened his heart and welcomed me as a son." The words sliced through me like glass. For a second, I couldn't even breathe. The silence in the ballroom was deafening, the kind that makes you feel everyone's eyes at once. I felt them on me, pitying, confused, uncomfortable. My ex-husband Marcus stared at the floor, too ashamed to look up. Even Victor, the man Ethan was glorifying, seemed stunned by the cruelty of what had just been said. My son hadn't just thanked his father-in-law, he had deliberately erased me. 35 years of sacrifice, of nights alone at the drafting table, of early mornings and aching muscles wiped away in front of 150 witnesses. The applause came anyway. Some clapped politely, others half-heartedly, as if unsure whether to join in. To me, every clap echoed like a slap to the face. I sat frozen in my chair, body stiff, heart hollow, the blood pounding in my ears. I had always feared being overlooked, but I never imagined being humiliated by my own child. And in that moment, as Ethan smiled and lifted his glass higher, I felt not just forgotten, but discarded. That night, driving home alone through the quiet streets of Chicago, One thought kept circling in my mind. If Ethan believed I had given him nothing, then maybe, just maybe, that's exactly what he would get. That night I drove home through the empty streets of Chicago, the city lights blurring through my tears. Ethan's words echoed in my head on a torturous loop. Not even a flower. Over and over like a hammer against stone. By dawn, sleep was impossible. At 5 in the morning, I gave up trying. I walked to my study, the room that had been my sanctuary for decades. This was where I planned projects, signed contracts, and dreamed about the future. A future I thought belonged to Ethan. The walls told the story of my life. Photographs of the first small building I completed in 1987, the framed certificate from 1989 when Vargas Construction officially became a registered company. A picture of Ethan at 2 years old, standing in an oversized hard hat, holding my hand at a dusty construction site. Albums meticulously put together by Marcus, back when we still believed in forever. I opened one of them, and there it was, the faded loan document from March 23rd, 1987. $20,000 that changed everything. I could still hear the bank manager's voice telling me I'd have to mortgage my house and rope in my parents as co-signers if I wanted that dream. And I could still feel the calluses from those years, when I worked from 6 in the morning until 11 at night, 7 days a week, building homes for families while I barely saw my own. As I flipped through those pages, another memory surfaced. The first major contract in 1994, a 40-unit residential complex that finally gave us credibility. Then the expansion into Wisconsin and Indiana. By 2010, we were worth over $2 million, employing more than 60 people who became like family. That was what I had built. That was what Ethan had just dismissed in one cruel line. I sat at my oak desk staring at the documents I had hidden away years earlier. Among them was the offer from Midwest Developments, a large firm that wanted to buy Vargas Construction in 2020. They had put $3.2 million on the table. I had turned it down without hesitation, telling myself Ethan's future was worth more than any number. But now I saw those papers with new eyes. Ethan had stood before 150 guests and declared that I had given him nothing. If he truly believed that, then perhaps it was time to make his words reality. No more illusions, no more promises. I pulled out another file, the deed for the Lake Geneva condo. The one-bedroom property overlooking the water had cost me $200,000. I had planned it as Ethan's wedding gift, a marital home where he and Sophia could begin their life together. The keys were ready. The deed was in my name. But after that speech, it felt like a gift to someone who would never value it. The more I stared at the paperwork, the clearer it became. My son wanted the glow of another man's legacy. He wanted the ease of inherited wealth without acknowledging the cost of the labor that built it. And I realized something painful but necessary. If I didn't act now, I'd be handing over not just money, but decades of my life to someone who had no respect for it. As the sun broke through the blinds, painting stripes of light across my desk, I reached for my phone. There was only one person I trusted in these matters. David Cortez, my lawyer of 15 years. He had walked me through every major contract, every expansion deal, every land acquisition. And he was about to walk me through the most important decision of all. David, I said when he answered, his voice still groggy from sleep. I need you to confirm something for me. That offer from Midwest Developments, is it still on the table? There was a pause, heavy with unspoken understanding. He knew what must have happened at the wedding. Linda, he said slowly, technically yes. They mentioned just a few months ago they'd still be interested, possibly at an even higher price now. But are you sure you want to make such a drastic move? I closed my eyes, hearing Ethan's voice again, the one that had cut me open. Not even a flower. Yes, I said, my voice steady now. If my son believes I gave him nothing, then nothing is exactly what he'll get. And in that quiet Sunday morning light, I made the decision that would change both of our lives forever. By mid-morning, I was still pacing the study papers scattered across my oak desk like battle plans. My phone buzzed with missed calls. Marcus, Ethan, even Sophia. But I ignored them all. Their voices would only try to sway me back into the role of the forgiving mother. And forgiveness, I realized, had turned into my cage. Instead, I dialed the one person who had always dealt with my life in terms of contracts, signatures, and hard facts. Carlos Romero, my lawyer of 15 years. Carlos wasn't just a professional. He had become a quiet witness to my entire journey from land acquisitions to complicated labor disputes. He knew every stone of the empire I had built. When he picked up, his tone was warm, unaware of the storm that had already passed through my life. Linda. How was Ethan's wedding? For a moment, my throat tightened. How could I explain in one sentence that a single toast had detonated 3.5 decades of sacrifice? I didn't answer his question. Instead, I went straight to the point. Carlos, I need you to confirm something for me. Midwest Development's offer from 2020. Is it still valid? Silence. Then the slight shuffle of papers on his end, as if he already knew why I was asking. Technically, yes. Miguel Soto, their CEO, mentioned a few months ago they were still interested. They might even raise the offer now, around $3.4 million. But Linda, what happened? Are you sure this isn't something to sleep on for a few days? I let out a short laugh, bitter and sharp. Carlos, I've been thinking about Ethan's future for 35 years. Last night he made it clear I'm not part of it. I don't need more time. He exhaled heavily, then shifted into the steady legal voice that had guided me through countless negotiations. The company is entirely in your name. Ethan has no legal ownership. He only had what you promised verbally over the years. And the Lake Geneva condo, that's yours too, still titled under your name. You have every right to sell both immediately. Midwest already completed due diligence in 2020, so the process could move very quickly. Days, not months. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling as the weight of his words sank in. Legally, I held every card. Ethan's inheritance existed only in my heart, never on paper. And maybe that was my mistake all along. Confusing love with entitlement, confusing sacrifice with obligation. Was this impulsive revenge, or was it self-defense after years of carrying the burden alone? I wasn't sure. But I did know one thing: if my son could erase me with a single sentence in front of 150 people, then I had every right to erase his expectations in return. Contact them, I said firmly. Start the process. I hung up and stood at the window, watching the Chicago skyline shimmer under the fall sun. Somewhere out there, my son believed he had inherited a future built by my hands. What he didn't realize yet was that I had just set in motion a decision that would prove him right. He truly would get nothing from me. Once Carlos confirmed everything I knew, the path forward. But the real test wasn't in the paperwork, it was in what happened next. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. At first it was Marcus, then Ethan, then an unknown number that I knew in my gut belonged to Sophia. I didn't answer a single one. By 8 in the morning, there were 7 missed calls from Ethan. By noon, that number had doubled. By the end of the day, the counter showed more than 20. Each call felt like a hammer, pounding at the door I had just closed. On the second day, the silence of my house was broken only by the constant buzz of my phone. 20 calls became 31. Text notifications lit up the screen, but I didn't open them. I didn't need to. I already knew the contents: excuses, regret begging, maybe even blame. I chose silence, not out of cruelty, but because silence sometimes speaks louder than words. Answering would have dragged me back into a cycle of explanations and apologies, of half-promises and emotional manipulation. Ignoring those calls wasn't easy. It felt like holding my breath while someone pounded on my chest, but it was necessary. Every vibration on that phone reminded me of the wedding night. 150 witnesses. My son lifting his glass, dismissing me as though I had been nothing more than an afterthought. If he could humiliate me publicly, then he could handle being ignored privately. And the truth was, this wasn't only about punishing him. It was about drawing a line, maybe for the first time in my life. For 35 years, I had always answered, always been available, always picked up, no matter how tired, how busy, how hurt. This time I didn't. Silence became my answer, a boundary I should have set long ago. By Monday morning, I was dressed in my best navy blue suit, the one I reserved for my most serious negotiations. This wasn't just another contract, it was the end of an era. As I drove through Chicago toward the glass towers of Midwest developments, my phone buzzed endlessly on the seat beside me. Ethan's calls, Sophia's texts, Marcus's voicemails. I let them all ring out. My mind was on something larger than their desperate noise. Miguel Santos, the CEO of Midwest, greeted me with the kind of polished courtesy only seasoned deal-makers possess. His office sat high on the 15th floor, the city skyline glittering behind him like a trophy case. He shook my hand firmly, his expression respectful but businesslike. "Miss Vargas, I have to admit your call surprised us. Vargas Construction has been on our radar for years. Your reputation in coastal and residential builds is one of the strongest in the Midwest." We sat across a sleek table as his legal team slid folders toward me. He didn't waste time. "Our current offer stands at $3.4 million. We've updated valuations since 2020. The market has shifted, but your contracts and reputation hold firm. We'd like to keep your core management in place, Antonio in production and Lydia in administration. They're key assets for us." That detail mattered more than the number. Antonio had been with me since the mid-90s, Lydia since the late 90s. They weren't just employees, they were family. Knowing they'd remain gave me a measure of peace, even as everything else collapsed. But then Miguel said what I knew would come. "And your son Ethan appears on our records as part of your management team." I looked him directly in the eye. My voice didn't waver. "He will not continue with the company. His future lies elsewhere." For a moment, Miguel blinked, registering the weight behind my words. But he didn't press. He simply nodded, jotting a note, the picture of professionalism. That was the beauty of business. Clean, simple, rational. No pleading, no guilt, no broken promises, just signatures. For 2 hours, we went line by line through the paperwork. The due diligence had already been completed years earlier, so the process was streamlined. We set the schedule, a preliminary agreement signed today, the final notarized closing on Wednesday. Quick, clean final. As I signed the first round of documents, I felt an odd mix of emotions. Satisfaction, yes. Relief, absolutely. But also, the kind of hollow ache you get when packing up a home you've lived in for decades. The space is still there, but it no longer belongs to you. When I left Midwest's offices, a folder of signed papers in hand, the October wind hit me sharp in the face. My phone showed more than 20 missed calls, stacked one after the other. Ethan, Marcus, numbers I didn't recognize but could guess. Inside that skyscraper, I had been Linda Vargas, businesswoman. Precise, professional, decisive. Outside, I was a mother whose son was unraveling. The contrast was almost unbearable. But one thing was certain: by Wednesday afternoon, Vargas Construction would no longer belong to me or to Ethan. It would belong to someone who valued it not as inheritance, but as an investment. And maybe that was the truest way to honor the empire I had built. After sealing the preliminary deal with Midwest, I turned my attention to the Lake Geneva condo. That condo had once been my symbol of hope, a fresh start for Ethan and Sophia. I bought it for $200,000, fully furnished, sitting right on the water, with views that could melt stress away. I had imagined handing them the keys on their wedding night. Instead, the keys still sat on my desk, unused, heavy with disappointment. I called Helena Cruz, a real estate agent I trusted with high-value properties. Within hours, she lined up a showing for a British couple, James and Margaret Thompson. They were retirees searching for a second home in the States. The moment Margaret stepped into the living room with its floor-to-ceiling windows, her eyes lit up. "It's exactly what we were hoping for," she said, running her hand along the glass. James, once a naval engineer, walked the space like a man inspecting blueprints. He admired the finishes, the craftsmanship, the sturdy details only a builder would notice. They didn't haggle. They offered $195,000 on the spot. Helena smiled at me, already pulling out the paperwork. Because the documentation was flawless: energy certificates, ownership history. Technical reports the sale could be wrapped up quickly. By Monday, the condo would belong to them. I should have felt relief. But instead, it felt like a funeral. Not for a property, but for the future I had pictured for my son. A home meant as a gift had become nothing more than an asset to liquidate. And then my phone rang again. This time I answered. Sophia's voice cracked through the line, raw and desperate. "Linda, please, don't do this. Michael hasn't eaten in 2 days. He's a wreck. The whole family is begging you to reconsider." For a moment my resolve trembled. Her sincerity was real. I could hear the tears. But sincerity doesn't erase cruelty. I steadied my voice. "Sophia, your husband crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. For 34 years I gave him everything. On Saturday he decided to erase all of it. If he says I gave him nothing, then that's exactly what he'll get." There was silence on the other end, then a soft sob, followed by her whisper. "He regrets it, Linda, more than you know." Regret, I thought, always comes cheaper than respect. I ended the call, placed my phone face down on the table, and signed the preliminary agreement for the condo. The papers felt heavier than they should have. That afternoon I realized something with painful clarity. Words may vanish into the air the moment they're spoken, but their consequences solidify like concrete. Ethan's careless toast had just cost him both a company and a home. And for me, it was proof that silence and signatures sometimes speak louder than any apology ever could. It didn't take long for the storm to show up on my doorstep. Late one afternoon, I heard the crunch of tires in my driveway. When I looked out, Ethan's black Audi was parked crookedly at the curb, headlights still on. The doors slammed, and seconds later there was a furious pounding at my front door. I opened it to see my son, face flushed, jaw tight, with Sophia just behind him, her eyes red from crying. "You sold the company," he demanded, his voice cracking between anger and disbelief. "Tell me it's not true." I held his gaze. "It's true. Midwest signed the papers yesterday. The final transfer will be done by Wednesday." Sophia stepped forward, her tone softer, almost pleading. "And the condo, Linda. Please say you didn't sell the condo." I didn't flinch. "That sold too. A British couple will close on it next week." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of their breathing. Ethan staggered back as if I had struck him. His hands went to his hair, pulling, his voice rising. Why would you do this? That was supposed to be mine. The business. The condo. Everything, you can't just take it all away. His words were louder than the autumn wind rushing through the trees, but I didn't let them pierce me. I had been pierced enough already. I answered calmly, my voice steady, like steel. Ethan, you made a choice on your wedding night. You stood in front of 150 people and told the world I had given you nothing. And now you finally understand what nothing feels like. Sophia sobbed quietly, clutching Ethan's arm. He paced like a man caged torn between rage and despair. You can't just erase me from everything he said. I'm your son. I can't erase you as my son. I replied, my throat tightening but my words clear. But I can erase the entitlement that's been poisoning you. You wanted to dismiss my sacrifices, my work, my love. So now you'll have to build your future on your own. The moment hung there, raw and final. His eyes searched mine for softness, for some hidden crack of forgiveness. But I had none to give. I stepped aside, opening the door wider, the gesture deliberate. Go, Ethan. Go and build something that's yours. Words have consequences. Now it's your turn to face them. For a long beat, he stood frozen. Then, with a sharp exhale, he brushed past me. The Audi roared back to life, taillights bleeding red against the dusk. Sophia glanced back once through her tears, as if begging me to reconsider, but I didn't move. I stayed in the doorway until their car disappeared down the street. When I closed the door, the silence inside felt heavier than any shouting match could have. It wasn't the silence of peace, it was the silence of endings. But sometimes endings are what make room for beginnings. 2 days after Ethan stormed out of my house, another familiar figure appeared at my door. Marcus, my ex-husband. He didn't knock softly. He knocked like a man on a mission. When I opened the door, his face was tight with frustration, his tone sharp before he even stepped inside. Linda, what are you doing? You sold the company, the condo. All because of one mistake our son made at his wedding. I motioned for him to sit, but he stayed standing, arms crossed, eyes fixed on me, as if daring me to defend myself. One mistake, I repeated quietly, almost to myself. Marcus, do you really think this was just one slip of the tongue? He leaned forward. Yes. It was cruel, yes. Embarrassing, yes. But it was a moment, a speech he probably regrets already. You've known Ethan his whole life. Don't erase 34 years of love for one sentence. I stood my ground. That sentence didn't come out of nowhere. It was a reflection of who he's become. That kind of dismissal, that kind of arrogance that's not a mistake. That's a mindset, and it's one I can't ignore. Marcus exhaled sharply, running a hand through his greying hair. You're overreacting. Parents forgive. That's what we do. We guide, we protect, even when they stumble. You're punishing him for being young and proud. Punishing him. My voice rose now, the hurt catching fire. No, Marcus, I'm teaching him. There's a difference. You always gave in when he whined, when he demanded more, when he played victim. You called it love. I call it spoiling. And now we're both seeing the cost of it. For a moment, the air between us grew thick with silence. I could see in his eyes that part of him knew I was right. He had always been softer, always quick to smooth things over rather than confront. But even as that truth flickered, he shook his head. He's our son, Linda. Family is supposed to forgive. I looked him straight in the eye. Family is supposed to respect each other first. Blood means nothing without respect. And if I have to choose between my dignity and blind forgiveness, I will choose dignity every time. That ended the conversation. Marcus's jaw tightened. His words ran dry. Without another attempt, he turned and left his footsteps, heavy against the hardwood floor. When the door clicked shut, I stood in the quiet, my chest tight, but my resolve stronger than before. That encounter made one thing clear. Forgiveness without accountability isn't love, it's enabling. And I wasn't going to enable my son anymore. A few evenings later, my phone rang again. This time, the name on the screen made me pause. Victor Delgado. I almost didn't answer. Part of me assumed this would be another plea, another attempt to soften me. But curiosity and maybe respect made me swipe to accept. His voice was calm, steady the way it always was. "Linda," he began, "I want to apologize. Ethan's words at the wedding. They shocked me too. I could see the hurt in your face that night, and I should have said something then. I didn't. And for that I'm sorry." I stayed quiet, waiting. He went on. "Listen, I don't want to meddle, but I can help. If money is what it takes to make things right. If transferring some property or setting up an account for Ethan, or even buying back into the company, would help ease this, then let me do it. You've worked too hard for this to end in bitterness." There it was, the solution that men like Victor always had at their fingertips. When something broke, they wrote a check. Money as glue money, as apology money, as proof of care. But this wasn't about money. It never was. "Victor," I said slowly, "I appreciate the thought. But you can't write over what happened. This isn't about accounts or property or balance sheets. It's about respect. My son humiliated me in front of 150 people. That wound doesn't heal with cash flow." He sighed, a sound heavy with age, not arrogance. "You're right. And maybe that's what I've always admired about you. You built everything from nothing. I inherited my start, but you sweated for yours. That kind of labor is invisible until it's gone. And I see now that Ethan doesn't see it yet." His words surprised me. They weren't patronizing. They were almost reverent. For a moment I felt a kinship with him, a man who lived in the spotlight, but could recognize the value of someone who built in the shadows. But still, I had to draw the line. "Victor," I said, "thank you for acknowledging that. But understand this. What Ethan needs isn't more money or another bailout. What he needs is to live without a safety net long enough to realize what it takes to stand on your own. I won't rob him of that lesson." There was a pause, long and thoughtful. Then he said quietly, "Then maybe this isn't about saving him. Maybe it's about letting him save himself." For the first time in days, I felt a small measure of relief. Victor understood at least partly. He might not agree with me, but he respected my choice. We ended the call politely, and as I set the phone down, I realized something important. People can admire the visible glow of wealth all they want, but it's the invisible labor, the grit, the sacrifice that builds a legacy. And legacies can't be bought back once they've been disrespected. When the papers were signed and the condo keys handed over, I packed what was left of my life into a moving truck and headed west. Chicago had given me everything, but it had also drained me. Too many memories lingered in the corners of every room. Contracts signed late at night. Arguments replayed in silence, the echo of Ethan's words still hanging in the air. Arizona called to me in a way no city ever had. Scottsdale, with its endless sky and desert air, promised something I hadn't had in decades: peace. The mornings there felt almost like a clean slate. I would wake before the sun, step out onto the terrace with a cup of black coffee, and watch the horizon glow pink before the heat rolled in. No deadlines, no crews waiting on my signature. Just quiet. At first, the silence unnerved me. I was a woman who had lived on schedules and phone calls, who thrived on the urgency of construction deadlines. But slowly, the absence of noise became medicine. I found myself breathing deeper, walking longer, and sleeping better than I had in years. Ethan's messages followed me, though. At the beginning, they carried the same storm he had brought to my doorstep: anger, disbelief, desperation. He accused me of betrayal, of abandoning him, of overreacting to what he still called a mistake. But weeks in the desert seemed to do what my words never could. His tone began to change. The long, angry paragraphs gave way to shorter, quieter notes. Admissions slipped through the struggle of job applications, the humiliation of rejection, the shock of earning barely enough to cover rent without the Vargas name behind him. Then came something new: reflection. He wrote about long hours at a small firm, about the sting of starting from the bottom, about realizing that every paycheck represented sweat time and sacrifice. For the first time in his life, my son was tasting the very life I had lived to give him better. And from a distance, I saw the beginning of humility forming in him, fragile but real. Sitting on that terrace in Scottsdale, surrounded by desert quiet and the smell of creosote after rare rain, I realized this was exactly why I had to walk away. Distance wasn't just saving me, it was forcing Ethan to confront a reality he had never faced. And maybe, just maybe, that distance was the only thing that could bring us back together one day. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon in Scottsdale when I heard the sound of tires crunching on my gravel driveway. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I looked out, I saw a dusty sedan pulling in plates from Illinois. The doors opened, and there stood Ethan and Sophia. They looked different, not polished, not glowing like they had on their wedding night. Ethan's shoulders slumped with the weight of something heavier than exhaustion. His hands caught my attention first, rough red from work knuckles chapped by cold air, the kind of hands you don't get from pushing paper. "Mum," he said softly. His voice stripped of arrogance. "We drove all night." I didn't answer right away. I just let the silence sit, because sometimes silence says more than words. Finally, I stepped aside and let them in. We sat at my small kitchen table, not the mahogany conference table of old deals, just a plain wooden surface, worn from everyday use. Ethan didn't touch the coffee I poured. He just started talking. "For the past 4 months, I've been working at a small construction firm in Chicago, entry level. They put me on cleanup duty, hauling scrap, mixing cement in the freezing wind. Some days I made less than what I used to spend on gas for the Audi. I thought I was too good for that, but I wasn't. I wasn't even close." His eyes watered, though he kept them fixed on the table. I learned more in those months than in my entire life. I learned to respect the men who sweat through their shirts in January, who keep buildings standing when nobody knows their names. I learned that I've been blind to what you gave me, Mum. And I'm sorry. Sophia nodded quietly beside him, her hand resting on his arm as if to steady him. He's not asking for money. He's not asking for the company or the condo. He just wants his mother back. For a long moment, I sat still. My heart was caught between two truths: the sting of his betrayal and the weight of his growth. The anger that had hardened me began to soften, not because of his words, but because of his hands. Calloused, raw proof that he had finally touched the life I lived for decades. I reached across the table, not for contracts or deeds, but for him. "Ethan," I said quietly, "this isn't about assets or inheritance. It's about us. I don't care about what you lost. I care about who you're becoming. And if you're willing to keep learning with those hands, then maybe, just maybe, we can start again." He nodded, tears finally breaking through. No more deals, no more conditions, just a mother and son, both realizing that love rebuilt with truth is stronger than anything money can buy. Forgiveness isn't a gift handed out freely. It has to be earned, shaped by responsibility and time. That's the lesson I wanted Ethan to carry forward, and it became the foundation of the next chapter in our story. One morning on the terrace, coffee steaming in my hands, I told him about an idea I had been sitting on for years. Not a return to Vargas construction, it was gone, and I had no regrets, but a smaller, leaner venture focused on the future. Eco-Build Solutions. I said, testing the name out loud, a company that specializes in green, energy-efficient builds, homes and offices designed not just to stand, but to last, saving energy and respecting the planet. Ethan leaned forward, old eyes sparking for the first time in months. You mean we could build this together? I shook my head. Not together. Not yet. You'll work for me, not with me. You'll be an employee for a year. No special treatment, no shortcuts. You'll earn a paycheck like everyone else. He swallowed hard, then nodded. I'll seed the company with $150,000 in capital. I continued. After 1 year, if you've proven yourself, you can buy in. Start with 10% ownership. If you save, if you work, you can increase your stake. But there's a ceiling. You'll never hold more than 30%. The rest will stay with me or future partners. That way you'll never confuse inheritance with entitlement again. For a moment I thought he might bristle, but instead he lowered his head and said, "Thank you, Mum. I'll take it." It wasn't just gratitude, it was humility, and that was new. I explained further. This isn't punishment. This is structure. Forgiveness doesn't mean erasing what happened. It means giving you space to prove you've learned. A year from now, if your hands are still calloused and your heart is still steady, then maybe we'll share this dream as partners. Until then, you'll stand as an employee, earning every step. Ethan looked out toward the desert horizon where the morning sun was burning off the haze. Then I'll earn it, he said quietly. And for the first time, I believed him. That day, we began drafting the paperwork for Eco-Build Solutions, LLC. Not a gift. Not a handout. A chance bound by rules fueled by work, anchored in respect. Because forgiveness, I realized, is never about forgetting. It's about creating new terms where love and responsibility can finally stand side by side. 1 year later, Ethan stood in front of me with a different kind of strength. His voice was steadier. His hands still carried the roughness of labor. And for the first time, I believed he had truly learned what it meant to earn. He had worked 12-hour days at Eco-Build Solutions as just another employee. No special office, no shortcuts, no favors. He mixed concrete managed supply deliveries, stayed late to run energy audits. He took criticism without storming out. And slowly he earned the respect of men and women who had no reason to see him as anything but the boss's son. By the end of that year, Ethan had saved $15,000 from his wages. He placed it on my desk, not as a gift, but as proof. Proof that he was ready to buy in. I watched him sign the papers, officially taking a 20% stake in EcoBuild. His ownership was earned, not given. The deal was simple. He would never hold more than 30%. The rest would remain mine or be shared with future partners. This wasn't about cutting him down. It was about ensuring he never confused legacy with entitlement again. As we inked the documents, I remembered something my father once told me when I was a young woman just starting out. Respect must not only be earned, it must be guarded. If you don't defend it, you'll lose it. Looking at Ethan, then I realized I hadn't just sold a company or a condo. I had lost something much harder. my blind belief that love and sacrifice alone would teach him gratitude. But in that loss, I gained something more valuable. I gained back a son who finally understood the cost of building, a man who no longer measured love in gifts or inheritances, but in sweat, in humility, in respect. Sometimes you have to let something break completely before you can rebuild it stronger. And in breaking our bond, I gave Ethan the space to grow into a man who could finally rebuild it with me.